Hi there everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm the GCSE Science teacher. In today's video we're going to be learning all about the menstrual cycle, and this is for GCSE Biology students. Specifically, if you're an AQA student, this will be in paper 2 under the homeostasis module. However, it could be in a different paper depending on the exam board, so I'll leave some information for you guys in the description box. Thank you so much, by the way, for every single one of you who have left a lovely, really kind comment on my videos, and you've just enjoyed these videos and have been sharing them, liking them, following my other social medias on Instagram and TikTok, all at the GCSE Science teacher. I really do appreciate it, and I'm absolutely blown away with the amount of you who've joined the channel and subscribed. So thank you so much. I know a lot of you are excited that we could reach 1,000 subscribers here. So if you would like to be a part of that, please do subscribe. And yeah, if you enjoy the video, let me know by liking it. So, what is the menstrual cycle? Let's talk about it. It's a process that starts at puberty in women, and this particular age depends on the woman, okay? A lot of different factors go into when menstruation actually occurs, but it does often happen around puberty. And it's a cycle that essentially occurs over and over and over again for the majority of the life of the woman, and it takes around 28 days. Although, again, with anything in biology, there's always some sort of discrepancies here and there. It can be slightly longer, slightly shorter. And essentially the process allows the woman to have a child, because what's happening in this process of the menstrual cycle is the uterus lining is built up and prepares for pregnancy. And the uterus lining is essentially made up of a vascular network of capillaries and tissue that supports life as it grows and develops. So as you can imagine, those vascular tissues include things like blood vessels, like I said, capillaries, and that kind of thing, to give the growing baby, the growing fetus, the growing embryo, the nutrients needed, etc. Now, when the uterus lining is not needed, it actually is shed. And this is only in the case of situations where there's no fertilized egg, there's no need for it, and the body just sheds it, because essentially it's not efficient or needed for the body to just maintain it all the time. And this happens in other mammals as well. Now, one of the misconceptions often with students I find is students think the menstrual cycle is menstruation. Note that menstruation is typically what we would call in everyday language a period. So menstruation is effectively the breaking down of that uterus lining, and blood is released through the vagina, and essentially that can last, a few days, a week, slightly longer, depending on, again, the individual. But the menstrual cycle is essentially a whole host of different events, including hormones and the breakdown and the buildup of that uterus lining. So hopefully that's kind of unmystified some of those misconceptions there. Okay, so with the menstrual cycle for GCSE, you need to know about 4 different hormones and their jobs. If you're doing the higher course, you need to kind of know the interactions of these hormones and what they do. So I'm going to talk about that as well, but the functions are very fundamental, and you do need to understand this regardless of what level you're doing, okay? So the 4 hormones involve estrogen, progesterone, LH or luteinizing hormone, and FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone. You can write LH and FSH in the exam. It's good to know, though, the full word, and we'll talk about what those words actually mean as well. Something else to mention, when it comes to the exam, they will probably give you some graphical data and ask you to interpret it as well. So I will show you that towards the end of this video if you were wondering. Now, before we go into what all of these hormones do, what actually is a hormone? Let's just remind ourselves. A hormone is a chemical messenger, and its role is really responsible in getting the body to do something or coordinate the body. And this is part of the endocrine system. Now, I did a whole video on the endocrine system. If you're interested, I'll link it for you. But just in short, the endocrine system is all about different organs, specifically the glands, releasing those chemical messengers, those hormones, into the blood directly, and they get moved towards target tissues. And those target tissues have receptors that essentially receive that information and cause something to happen, cause a cell signaling response, or cause the particular target tissue to uptake something or release something further. Now, when it comes to the hormonal system or the endocrine system, you need to know, in comparison, the nervous system is much quicker than the endocrine system, and that's because it uses chemical signaling, and it's an electrical impulse. The chemicals are the neurotransmitters, they diffuse across synapses, but in terms of the endocrine system, it simply uses the hormonal release, and that goes directly into the blood, and it takes time for it to get to that target tissue, which is longer lasting compared to the nervous system, but it does take a bit longer as well. Okay, so let's talk about the 4 different hormones involved in the menstrual cycle. And estrogen we'll talk about first because it's the one that, when you kind of mention female fertility or female puberty, this is often the hormone people think of. And it's because it has a really important job. Estrogen is all to do with repairing and thickening the uterus lining after menstruation, after a period has occurred. And this will, if we were to have from day 1 to day 28, the average time of the menstrual cycle, on day 1 to 7, the estrogen levels start to rise. And that's because on day 1, the menstrual cycle begins and menstruation has just occurred. Okay, so the uterus lining needs to be built back up. Now, some of you may know that estrogen is actually also found and utilized in the contraceptive methods, such as the contraceptive pill. And this is part of the course that you also need to know for GCSE Biology. This is because estrogen has an inhibitory factor. So it actually inhibits the effects of another hormone called FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone. Now, that hormone is all involved with maturing the egg cell. However, estrogen stops this hormone from working so that only one egg cell actually matures. And it can also just stop egg cells maturing in the first place as well, again, kind of helping to prevent with pregnancy. So estrogen has kind of a multifaceted function. And those of you who are doing higher should really know about the inhibition of FSH using estrogen as well. Now, like I said, this happens from day 1 to 7. The levels of estrogen begin to rise. And what are the other hormones involved? So if we have a look at progesterone, that's the next one along, this maintains the uterus lining. So once we've built the uterus lining back up using estrogen, progesterone actually helps to maintain it. So progesterone itself is to progestate. Gestate means pregnancy, and pro just means encouraging pregnancy. And how is it encouraged? Well, it's essentially encouraging it by having the uterus lining stable. And remember, the uterus lining is made up of lots of capillaries to provide blood to the growing embryo as it is starting to develop and divide. So where does progesterone come from? Well, it again comes from the ovaries, as does estrogen. Specifically, there's a part called the corpus luteum, and this is a kind of casing of the egg cell. It kind of acts like, yeah, a protective layer, if you will, and the egg cell is released from the ovary through the fallopian tube, and that's where fertilization occurs. But the corpus luteum, those group of cells, it's almost a temporary organ. It releases that progesterone, and this helps to maintain that uterus lining as well. This is from day 14 to day 28 before the next period. So progesterone levels should be stable and kind of rise gradually, but should maintain that uterus lining as well. Now, another hormone, yes, there's another one. The third hormone you need to know is called LH, or luteinizing hormone. Now, you can just write LH in the exam, that's fine, but what does luteinizing actually mean? Well, luteinizing is Latin for yellow. So if you look at the etymology of different words, the meaning of them, you'll know that luteinizing, yeah, it derives from Latin, and it means the color yellow. That yellow color is referring to the corpus luteum, and essentially that is therefore showing that luteinizing hormones are somehow linked with maintaining the uterus lining and helping with pregnancy. So what does luteinizing do, and where does it come from? It actually comes from a specific part of the brain in the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland, as we know, is the master gland, and that's because it has effects on other glands. So the pituitary gland will release luteinizing hormone. Specifically day 14, there is a huge spike in luteinizing hormone, and this LH will travel in the blood, and essentially the target tissue is the ovaries. And as it gets to the ovaries, it causes the egg to be released, because this is when ovulation occurs at day 14. So ovulation is a scientific word just for the release of the egg cell from the ovary. And that is to allow for the egg to be fertilized. So we've maintained the uterus lining, it's built up, it's ready for the fertilization event, and then the egg cell is released. Now, a very important hormone that's also released from the pituitary gland is called FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone. Now, what does that mean, follicle stimulating? Well, it essentially means a hormone that helps to build follicles on the egg cell, and that means it's matured. So lots of different structures will help the egg cell to develop and mature in preparation for that fertilization event. So FSH is released just before the egg is released to make sure that it's mature enough for fertilization. So again, like I said, FSH is released by the pituitary gland, that master gland, and it acts on the ovaries. So FSH essentially happens just before day 14, and therefore it causes that egg cell to be mature and ready to be released. And therefore, when we get to day 14, the egg cell is released and the egg cell moves from the ovary into the fallopian tube, ready for the sperm cell to join and meet it. Now, if there is no sperm cell, if there's not been a fertilization event, the egg cell will essentially be broken down, the uterus lining will be broken down, and menstruation will occur, and that will be released. The blood will be released from the vagina. And again, the cycle continues, and this goes on and on and on and on. And that is the menstrual cycle. So it's a pretty fascinating topic. And like I said, this can be graphically represented as well. So you can see at the beginning of the menstrual cycle, there is menstruation. The uterus lining has been broken down. This would be typically known as a period. The uterus lining then builds back up thanks to estrogen and is maintained by progesterone. As the egg cell has matured thanks to FSH, a surge of LH occurs at day 14. And this causes ovulation. So the egg is mature and the egg cell is ready to be fertilized. Now, if there is an egg cell that has been fertilized, the uterus lining is maintained. Progesterone levels will stay high and are stable to keep that uterus lining built, and pregnancy will occur. However, if there's not any pregnancy and there's no fertilization, the egg cell and all of the uterus lining is broken down and released through the vagina, and therefore we have menstruation. And again, this just cycles on and on. So like I say, this could be something you were asked to talk about in the exam, whether it's just the function of each of them, if it's more of a long answer question, if it's even a graphical representation to suggest which line represents which specific hormone. It could be something like that you're asked to do. So it's really worth just understanding what each of these hormones do and think about it logically. A lot of students get confused which hormone comes first, but if you think about it, the egg cell needs to be mature before it's released. So that means FSH must occur in higher levels than LH in the process. You also need to know that the menstrual cycle needs the uterus lining to be built up and broken down. So just remembering which one does that. Is it progesterone? Is it estrogen? Etc. etc. It's worth just thinking logically about what needs to happen when, so that it makes sense when you write it. And I would recommend, if you are still struggling, you use flashcards and things like that to help you out. And just visualizing it with a graph will really help as well. And that is it. Thank you so much for your time today. I've been the GCSE science teacher and you have been curious. If you found this video helpful and you enjoyed it, feel free to give it a big thumbs up to let me know. Share it with someone else so they can join our amazing community here on YouTube. And if you'd like more videos from me, feel free to click on the ones I've linked for you, or you can check out my Instagram and TikTok at the GCSE science teacher as well. I've got loads of content on there, but also lots of playlists here as well. So it's totally up to you, whatever floats your boat. In the meantime, have a fantastic